Okay, cool. Everyone, we'll get started. So it's first of all, it's great to see so many people here back in person. It's really nice. So welcome back to Lean Agile Edinburgh. Welcome to Skyscanner. This is Skyscanner's first in-person meetup in over 2 years. So go gentle on us. We've tried to get all the logistics right. Hopefully the pizza order's gone okay. So that's a good start. My name's Laz. I'm one of the hosts of Lean Agile Edinburgh. We've also got Suzanne here, who's one of the other hosts of the meetup group. So we take this in turns, and Lean Agile Edinburgh is a community, for you, the people who are practicing Agile in Edinburgh, and also over the pandemic beyond Edinburgh as well. We've had lots of people dialing in over the pandemic from all sorts of places. So tonight we've also got Product Forge, with Alan from Product Forge here as well, who's live streaming for us very kindly. So if you've got a reason to be live streaming something, then give Alan a shout and see if he can help you out with that. So I'll go through some other logistical things. So a couple of things. COVID, obviously, hopefully nobody's feeling symptomatic. If you do, go and enjoy the live stream at the other end of the office. Obviously, we're not required to wear masks indoor, but if you feel safer personally wearing a mask, then obviously that's cool. Please do that. As I said earlier on, the logistics of this building are such that the toilet's on the other side of the security doors. So if you do need to go to the loo, that's fine, but take a pass with you so you can get back in afterwards. Fire escapes, there's one there. There are no drills planned. So if the fire alarm rings, follow me out the door that way. There is Wi-Fi at Skyscanner Guest Wi-Fi, all one word. Hopefully you don't need it. The 4G in here is pretty good. Code of conduct is on the wall. I'm not going to read it all out to you, but basically be nice and excellent to each other. If you have any reason to feel in a way that you shouldn't be feeling, then come and speak to me, come and speak to Suzanne, and we'll do our best to do it right. But if you basically be nice, be human, and we'll be fine. Covered that. Jobs board. People move around all the time. So there's a jobs board on the wall over there. People have already put some stickies up, which is great. I put a list of Skyscanner's vacancies on there as well, just so you can see what we've got. And in terms of the end of this evening and the next event, I'm not going to. I will call time at some point and kick you all out, but I'm not going to wait for an official end. So when you feel it's time for you to leave, you can leave. Don't feel you need to wait. Once we're done with the talk, we'll have some lean coffee and some discussion. But if you feel that the time for you to go is that time, then please leave. So I'll say that the next event is the 25th of May. Stephen is planning it, and it's likely to be in person with a couple of talks and probably live streamed if Alan is available. The venue is still TBC, so if your workplace is getting back in the business of hosting meetups, then it would be great to hear from you. And also, if you want to talk the next meetup, then give us a shout. There's details on the meetup page. Cool. I thought I'd share a little bit of news about Skyscanner as well. I thought it'd be nice since we're here, just to let you know how things are going. I've been here for 7 years now. I'm looking after the software delivery ops team, which is as close as we get to Agile coaches and all of that kind of stuff. Skyscanner has been an amazing place for me to work over the last 7 years, and from a cultural, inclusive perspective, being able to sort of try out new things. It's been really great. Life's thrown me several sort of personal curveballs over the last few years, and Skyscanner supported me every step of the way as well. Obviously, the world has thrown us all a big curveball over the last couple of years, and the good news from our perspective is that travel is back. We've started passing some pre-pandemic records of our own over the last few months. So it's really good to be in a really stable situation again. Fortunately, Skyscanner was in a pretty strong financial situation going into the pandemic, so we're able to weather the storm and focus on what travelers needed, which was really what we needed to be doing. As I said, we're hiring again, so if you're interested in a role at Skyscanner, or somebody you know is interested in a role at Skyscanner, and you think they might be that here might be the right place for them, then don't give me a shout, because I'm not eligible for the referral bonus, but Ramsey and Al Akbar over there are. So give them a shout. And they will be happy to put you in the system, I'm sure. We've recently also opened up a new engineering manager path for people coming into Skyscanner. So our engineering managers are the core of delivery at Skyscanner. They're scrum masters and they're leaders of engineering excellence or engineering principles. And we've now opened up a new path where people can come in who haven't managed before. So if people are senior engineers, they've got that engineering skill, but they want to transfer into engineering management, then we've now got a new path where we'll bring people in and we'll give them all the training on the way through as well. So we've obviously adjust the interview process for that as well. So that's enough for me. We're gonna have a talk tonight. Now, I reckon this talk's really exciting. When Ramsey said he wanted to do this talk, I was intrigued and on board from the offset. And I think with what we're going to talk about, I think we've got 40 people in the room. I think if we asked everybody to do a presentation on this topic, we'd get 60 different presentations. So I think it should start a whole bunch of different conversations. So we're gonna have the presentation, and then we're going to do some discussion afterwards. Ramsey's been in Skyscanner for longer than me, and he now works in the software delivery ops team as well. And he's my sort of my guide rail for what Agile is and what keeps me true. So I'm really excited to hear what Ramsey's going to say, and they're going to introduce themselves as well. But Alakbar's just joined Skyscanner as a grad or recently graduated. Yes, cool. So we've got some two interesting perspectives on this topic. So cool, folks. Do you want to take it away? Cool, thank you.
Cool, thanks, Laz. Just give us a second to resort all the logistics that have all gone to sleep over the past couple of minutes. Click.
Okay. There we go. Okay, yeah, let's begin. So, it's kind of thrown me off because I was going to introduce Ramsey, but now that Laz has, I'm going to do it anyway. Otherwise, I'm just going to be totally thrown off this evening. But yeah, Ramsey's worked in a variety of engineering positions, and he's currently working as a senior software delivery ops manager at Skyscanner. He first worked in Agile back in 2009 as part of an industrial placement at Microsoft.
And this is Alakbar. As a relatively recent computer software... Sorry, man.
Don't worry.
This is Alakbar. As a relatively recent computer science graduate, he was playing Flash games on Miniclip in 2009. But since then, he's been working on honing his craft and learning all about agile ways of working. It was in a conversation with Alakbar several weeks ago that I restarted a train of thought that I first had several years ago. Agile isn't new. It's been around for well over 20 years now, and there's entire generations of software engineers and project managers in every other role who haven't known any other way of building software. So why hasn't it become second nature?
Well, I'm sure that some of you are familiar with the manifesto for Agile software development. It shaped our attitude and mindset, and it's helped us build better software over the years. But the thing is, these values tend to be opposite to those that we've grown up with. Let's imagine for a second a set of values for raising a child and what that might look like.
So we might begin with a value like persistence over contemplation, attainment over understanding, punishing failure over rewarding success, and cold comfort over the road less traveled. Well before we ever enter the workplace, our mindset has been carefully shaped by a broad mix of teachers, our parents, and our peers. And to be clear, and to be fair, for the most part, this is exactly what we needed growing up. But some aspects of it really steer us away from a healthy, agile mindset. And interestingly, these values appear across the globe. Though, of course, there are cultural nuances and differences in how they manifest, but whether you're in the UK, the US, or China, you see similar values being exhibited by parents and teachers. As kids, the mantra that's typically hammered into us is one of simply working harder. But this certainly isn't how we want to do things in our Agile teams. We strive to improve how we work by removing waste and improving flow. But think back to your school days, sitting tests or exams, or even just doing your homework. When you didn't do well, you were probably told it's because you didn't study hard enough or you didn't work hard enough. And therefore, the lesson in the future is simply that you should study more and work harder.
Or in other words, just throw more time at the problem rather than taking a step back and looking for systematic issues like, was the study technique actually working for me? We see a similar sort of problem in software development too, because we can end up chasing perfection because we convince ourselves that it's the only desirable outcome for us. But in Agile, this isn't really how we do things. We always try and balance making software that's good enough whilst also delivering value early and often to customers. And you don't really have to look far to see an example of this. You probably walked by this Lego model of the Death Star. And I think it's a good analogy because they kept building this machine that had a fatal flaw. They didn't take a step back to analyze their situation. And it's these sort of traps that we can fall into if we don't take the time to contemplate what we're doing.
And the model of the Death Star is just at reception in case you missed it on the way in. Our second value is attainment over understanding. And I personally feel relatively fortunate to not being overly subjected to this one growing up, but I know plenty of friends and extended family who have been.
This is the opposite of valuing working software over documentation. We end up valuing tangible things like trophies, grades, awards, over genuine understanding of a topic.
For a lot of kids, and particularly teenagers, there's a great sense that self-worth is determined by things like academic or sporting achievements. Being able to produce a document like a school report card or a sport trophy really shows just how hard you've worked, and it can easily become the only thing that matters, as opposed to, for example, actually understanding something, or indeed just having the confidence that you understand something. As Akbar says, this essentially becomes a case of documentation being more valuable than actual progress. Mastering a subject in school becomes less important than acing the end of your test on it. And this contradiction is evident in companies across the globe too. For example, people valuing lengthy acceptance criteria on a Jira ticket far more than someone spending the time to genuinely understand what a user desires or actually requires from a piece of software.
Let's move on to punishing failure over rewarding success. Until you're an adult, failure is almost always a bad thing. And for me, this manifested in the form of having to do well in school and university. But now as I enter the workplace, I'm kind of told otherwise. People tell me about the problems that they've caused and how they've learned from it. For example, there was one person that I was speaking to who made a mistake and it caused the Skyscanner website to just go completely offline, like skyscanner.net, offline completely. And rather than people being angry at that person, instead they use this mistake as an opportunity to step back and to learn from it.
In my experience, this is one of the most difficult mindset shifts for people when they begin working with Agile teams. And across the years, I've had many tricky conversations, some with relatively junior people, others much more senior, about their attitudes towards failure. It's often so fundamentally baked into our nature that failing is bad, that the fear of failing can truly paralyze us. Rather than suffering a minor setback from which we can easily recover, we're tempted to spend days, weeks, months, maybe even years doing insane amounts of upfront planning to try and make sure that there's nothing out there that could possibly surprise us.
And then when things do surprise us, it's really tempting to just assume that it's because we didn't do a good enough job of planning it. So we end up committing to planning even more in the future, even though we know that that's not necessarily always the right answer. Another issue is that as kids, we don't even need to fail to get in trouble. We just need to be at risk of failing. We're all familiar with phrases like, don't do that, you could have gotten hurt. This makes a lot of sense when you're trying to cross a busy road, but less so when the stakes are lower. And that kind of brings us on nicely to the next point, cold comfort over the road less traveled. Because most people like plans, even when we know that they're bad, it's just because they bring us comfort. We choose the metaphorical, smooth, straight motorway over the winding back roads, even when the motorway doesn't seem to go where we want it to go. But it's not really just that. It's also the fact that it's comfort for your manager, your parents, your friends, because they know that you're treading a known path.
And as a really nice example of this, in the UK, at around 13 years old, you begin to choose which subjects you're going to study and ultimately sit national exams in school. And it's a huge decision because the options to adapt your plan, even in the relatively short term after doing that, are extremely limited. And the choices you make will influence your career path for the next 10, maybe even 20 years. And you do all of this at an age when you're deemed to be too young, too immature, too irresponsible to even go to Tesco and buy a can of Red Bull. But we all create this plan and we're told to believe that it's a good thing because it sets us up for success in the future.
I mean, don't get me wrong, Detailed and lengthy plans bring us a lot of comfort for everyone involved, but they're created with limited knowledge, but we have to give them room to change. Otherwise, we assume from day one that we have all the information and that our plans won't change, which is just really, really unlikely. Sometimes our plans do technically support change, but it ends up being more of an exception rather than the rule.
So the key takeaway at this point is that at the point we enter the workplace, we often aren't set up for success. We've typically each had a couple of decades, maybe even longer, of people and society actively pushing us away from an agile mindset. And then, if anything, it gets worse.
At Skyscanner, we try and counteract this by having, we have this thing called Skyscanner University where there's loads of free resources on things like Agile and other things. But the problem is that the courses that we have aren't part of a mandatory induction or onboarding process. I mean, for example, I didn't even know about these until Ramsey told me about them. But now that I've done them, I find them extremely valuable. And in fact, I often find myself going back and doing them over again to learn more.
And I think making courses like this part of a mandatory induction is something we're talking about doing more internally. And I think it's actually one of the key takeaways from the presentation today that you can take back to your own teams or to your own businesses as a likely opportunity to improve.
But that being said, courses aren't a silver bullet. And there's a lot of subtlety and nuance in doing Agile well, because it ends up being more about unlearning myths and misconceptions rather than learning something new. We come to Agile with our own misconceptions. For example, in my third year of university, I was taught about Agile. But after I talked with Ramsey, I found that the practices that I encouraged and the misconceptions that I pushed were roughly about 15 years out of date. And Agile was meant to help me with my third year group project, but can we really expect a group of students to pick it up from a few slides just in a few weeks?
And in the workplace, we often see the side effects of the culture and mindset challenges that we touched on earlier, which are then just further compounded by the issues that Alakbar has just described. For example, it's tempting for us to seek comfort in, or even reward, excess planning as it masquerades as genuine progress, or to instinctively react negatively to things like production outages, leaning towards lessons that amount to a need to do more planning, or even just pointing the finger of blame at someone, rather than maybe even just accepting that something might have been a reasonable risk.
I mean, there's a lot of comfort in easily blaming a lack of thorough planning. But maybe the answer is to learn how to handle that situation, because regardless of how much we plan, problems will always emerge.
There's one final area that we think is particularly noteworthy in contributing towards the challenges of Agile in 2022. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword. As an industry, we've uncovered better ways of developing software by doing it. For somebody like Alakbar starting their career today, it's so much easier, even compared to a decade ago when I began mine, let alone 20 odd years ago when the Agile Manifesto was written. The quality and maturity of things like automated test frameworks, production monitoring and paging, tooling to help with peer reviews or pair programming, they're all so much better than they were before. And these things, as well as a few others, have really transformed our ability to continuously integrate and deploy our changes. This means that teams release small incremental changes multiple times a week, maybe even multiple times a day. It's low risk, easily repeatable, and is really low effort. But the drawback to this is that we've lost the focus that we once had around the value that we're actually releasing, because we quite deliberately don't collect everything up and release it as a big bang.
And we lose the visibility of the release cycle, all the way from the design review to coding it, testing, bug fixes, and then finally releasing. I mean, how often are we releasing things to customers? We often see, for example, in your app stores, change logs like this, where you'll just see the same old thing every time. Bug fixes, performance improvements. Sometimes the developer doesn't even provide any information. And don't get me wrong, we're guilty of this too. We've done a similar thing. Because not only are we giving the customer zero information here, but also internally we sometimes lack the information too. By using things like continuous integration or continuous development rather than discrete releases, we end up losing visibility of our release cycle.
And perhaps to better illustrate the problem with this, you're probably all familiar with the expression to try and boil the ocean. It represents the idea of taking on a task which is so impossibly large that you just can't do it. And in Agile, we typically work around this through techniques like thin vertical slices. But in doing so, we risk creating a whole new problem. By successfully boiling 1 cup of water at a time, we can kid ourselves that we're making good progress towards this goal of boiling the ocean. And if we just keep going for a bit more time, a few more sprints, ultimately we'll be successful.
But what can we do about this? Well, for example, at Skyscanner, we've recently integrated a tool that allows us to visualize cycle time for the full life cycle of a new feature, beginning with the initial technical design all the way through once it's finished and live in production. And the numbers that I've used there are just for illustration purposes. That's not actually how long it takes. Like, for example, imagine a car company that doesn't know how long it takes them to build a car, even though they obsess over every optimization of their production process. It sounds kind of absurd in that context, but this is sometimes what we end up doing in the software industry.
So what can we learn from this? One of the key takeaways is that while some of the challenges have changed over the years, Agile still remains almost as tough today as it was 20 years ago, maybe even tougher. And this requires us all to maintain a strong focus on helping each other to understand what we're aiming for and why. And I think this is particularly true with more junior people or those who have less experience. So as I touched on earlier, ensuring that your company or team has appropriate onboarding and training material to get people up to speed, and also being mindful that industry experience doesn't necessarily mean that they actually understand.
But even more so, we need to recognize that the challenges extend beyond getting good practices in place. It's a mindset, and people can have a hard time changing their minds and behaviors. We discussed earlier that just about everything that we learn growing up is the opposite of how we strive to do things in Agile. In life, we end up choosing what's comfortable, we avoid failure, we keep working at a problem rather than taking a step back. But in Agile, we do the opposite. We take risks, we accept failure, and we analyze our way of working.
There's a quote from Theodore Roosevelt that really sums it up for me. Far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much, because they live in a grey twilight that knows not victory nor defeat. Life doesn't generally set us up for success with this, and so we need to really support people, including ourselves, and help them become comfortable in agile ways of thinking. Otherwise, we and our teams are destined to an eternity in grey twilight.
If you don't want to spend an eternity in grey twilight, then consider working at the Skyscanner. Have a look at our vacancies on skyscanner.net/jobs. We've got vacancies for engineering managers, senior software engineers, and we also have our 2022 graduate program too. So yeah.
So at this point, we'd love to take any questions that you've got for us. Laz has a microphone, so.
Just a question on the tool that you're talking about to measure the cycle time. It's two parts, if that's okay.
Sure.
First part, what benefit are you seeing out of actually doing that? And the second bit is, are you seeing uniform cycle time? Are you seeing that it varies wildly depending on feature? That's something that I've never been able to really get my head around about how we actually measure it. So quite interested about that.
Cool. So yeah, it's fairly early days for us. So we're still kind of gathering data. We've been running a trial with a number of squads for probably about 3 or 4 months now, and we're kind of in the process of rolling it out company-wide. What we are seeing definitely is there's big differences in time between one squad and the other. Just sometimes it's the nature of what they're working on, the nature of the feature or the code base they're doing it on. Other times it's probably coming down to the way the squad's actually working. One of the key benefits that I think we're starting to see from it is, I think a challenge that we have, and I think this is quite common across the industry, is essentially high work in progress. You know, it always comes back to these basic principles. And one of the things that we saw particularly early on with the trial was it's really common for squads to have multiple epics running in parallel. And by visualizing the cycle time and just kind of visualizing also just the number of concurrent epics we had, we were able to help squads just really sort of narrow it down to sort of maximum 1 or 2 epics per team. And with that, we saw really significant reductions in cycle time. And off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like a 37% reduction that we reckoned we could get, which is obviously absolutely massive. You know, if every one of our teams can deliver 37% faster than they otherwise were, you know, it's a massive competitive advantage. So it's early signs, but definitely really promising just now.
And that's really what you're trying to do with the tool, is to drive the teams to reduce their WIP to...
I think it's whatever it needs to be. So I think WIP is probably one of the most obvious ones. I think, you know, we're all super familiar with it. It seems every team you work in has the same challenges. But I think for me, one of the sort of tough points, and it's actually one of the sort of questions we're going to propose for the breakout sessions, is it's really difficult for us to know as a business, are we actually doing any better than we were 5 years ago when it comes to delivering software? We know that we've got fewer production incidents, we know that our test coverage is better, and we know all these other things, but are they actually adding up to us moving faster and delivering value faster? And for us to have cycle time at an epic level, because epics are typically where true value is realized, that's going to give us data that I don't think we've really had since basically when I joined and we had release trains going every 8 weeks, and you had that massive release note with everything in it. I think we're trying to get back to that point where we can say, it's taken us 12 weeks to build this thing, and that's good ROI. It took us 20 weeks to build this one, and that's probably longer than it should have been, and we probably should have cut it a bit sooner.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other questions before we do breakers? Scott.
Hi there. Great presentation, by the way. Really, really enjoyed it. How close are you to the customer? And I'll tell you for why. I'm reading a book just now, When Coffee Competes with Kale, and I would really recommend it to anyone in software. And it's about jobs to be done. And it really tries and explain that anyone using your apps or anyone using your software is trying to do things. Yeah. And I think sometimes in a lot of the teams that I work with, and we get obsessed with DevOps, and we get obsessed with what's the DevOps. Chaos Monkey is the latest version, where we're kind of integrating even the, all these technical bits, the releases, the bug fixes, and that. How close are you to the customer? Because I think it doesn't matter how quick we do software, if it's not actually, inventing new jobs to be done, your products go a bit stale.
Yeah, I think the honest answer to that is it probably depends on the team. I think some are very good through combinations of user testing sessions, understanding the data and the analytics we get from the website or from the app. Other ones probably don't quite manage to engage at quite the same level. I think actually somewhat ironically, the teams that we find struggle the most with this are actually our internal teams that are building for other parts of the org. So even though their customers are potentially literally at the next bank of desks, they're not necessarily as good at engaging and getting the same sort of communication and data from them. I think it's a little bit ironic, but I think when you've got that sort of disconnect to your customers just via the World Wide Web, you're more conscious of that, and you make the effort to capture the data you need and to really analyze it and understand it. And we've got a great team of data scientists who are able to really sort of dig into things and really understand. But it's definitely something we're always trying to get better at, and sort of putting the traveler first, as we say, is really important to us in Skyscanner. It's the way we think about everything. So I would say I think we're probably pretty good at it, but there's always more work to do in this area.
Do breakouts. No? Cool. So Ramsey, thank you very much. Cool. So
We do 2 questions we want to pose to the group as part of the breakouts. So our first one is: does everyone in your team have an agile mindset? Secondly, how do you know your teams are delivering more now compared to X months or years ago, which is a bit like what I was saying in response to the question. And finally, how would you improve your team or your company's onboarding experience, particularly for more junior people? So just some food for thought as we go into the breakouts.
Cool. So I think what we'll do now is we'll take like a 10-minute break, and whilst we're doing the 10-minute break, if you can grab, there's Post-its and markers and stuff in that box over there. I'll move it up here, and we can put the things we'd like to talk about on this big board at the back. And then once we come back from the break, we'll talk through the stuff, we'll group them up, and then we'll do a quick round of dot voting. And then assuming that there are different things to talk about, we will have different things to talk about on each table. Okay? And then you can decide which table you're going to go to based on what you would like to talk about. So that sort of saves us having 5 tables doing this, discussing the same thing at the same time. Where you want to be. For those of you who haven't come across, what's the thing, Suzanne, that I'm forgetting the name of? No, not Lean Coffee. The bigger. No. It will come back to me. No, it'll come back. The one, Scott, that has the law of 2 feet. Open space technologies. That's it. So law of 2 feet. If you're not learning something or contributing something, use your feet. Okay. So if you find yourself at the wrong table, it's okay to move. Okay. Cool. So we'll have a 10-minute break. If you want to have a chat with someone, have a chat with someone. If you want to use the facilities, there's a couple of security passes over there you can grab so you can get back in. Whilst we're doing that, stick some stuff on the whiteboard, and then in 10 minutes' time we'll stop and we'll start collating stuff and work out what we're going to talk about. Okay, cool. Thanks everyone. And for those of you on the live stream, thank you very much for joining us. We're kind of done with the live stream now. Thank you.